Hi, my name's Gavin, and I decided that I'm going to do my field assignment project not on an enclave, but instead on Paris. Um, with that, there are a few difficulties with some of the questions because they pertain to immigrants rather than the people at their homeland. But with that in mind, let's get started. So, for question one, where I went was Paris, France. The ethnic cultural groups dominant there are obviously those who were born natively in France, in Paris, but actually they have a large influx of immigrants from northern Africa, namely Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. Uh, Really, they pull immigrants from all around the world because it is such a desirable location. So for question two, I'm going to have to focus more just on the push and pull factors for the immigrants coming into France, just because of the nature of my specific project. As far as the immigrants are concerned, from northern Africa, from your Tunisia, your Libya, I think a lot of those countries still have pretty authoritative governments and not a lot of social equality. And in France, it's totally the opposite. Um, like work weeks are only 35 hours and they have to pay you twice as much for any time after that. There's really good health care and just social benefits in general to living in France. As far as those coming from around the world are concerned, I think Paris, after going there myself, you realize how beautiful and how mesmerizing of a city it is. Um, I think it's kind of just like that. If I can make it there, I can make it anywhere kind of mindset that people don't really worry about how much money they're going to make because they're moving to Paris and it's so romanticized. So, what I thought was one of the coolest things about Paris was actually the landscape elements, namely um, the feeling of just it's a large city like New York, so there's a lot of public transport and just walking you're gonna do, and it always seems that right around the corner there's something like a massive cathedral or a mini Arc de Triomphe or something just beautiful and amazing and older than the United States, even in some cases. There's a lot of very small streets because it's such a dense network of a city that has been around for so long, since a time where they didn't need as much room as they do now to get cars down the streets. So I feel France is really unique from the rest of the world in this way that they've really preserved everything as well as they can, to the point that even there have been limitations on what heights you can build at, just so that you don't obstruct the view of something just randomly historical and gorgeous. So, as far as trying a new ethnic food goes, I actually did try escargot and it was very good. It's not something that everyone eats there because it's a delicacy. It's not like their cheeseburger that they just eat escargot all the day. Something more along those lines would be like one of the omelets that I got, like that one there, the just a ham and cheese omelet, and they do love their cheese in France, it seems. Especially the funky cheeses. Even the milk had a sort of sourness to it, not in a bad way, but between that and the pastries, um, there's French bakeries, or just bakeries as they call them there. It seems at every corner, and the worst. the worst croissant that I had in the whole country is possibly still one of the best pastries I'd had up until that point, which is kind of funny. So something that when you go to Paris you can tell about them is they were, and I would argue they still are, very Catholic people. Something, I mean, you can see it very much so in the architecture. I mean, I'm no architecture major, but there's something about the architecture that screams to me Catholic. Um, it's also home to the Notre Dame, which is arguably, I'd say, one of the most historical cathedrals in the world. I went in for just a few minutes, and as far as I could tell, they still hold masses all throughout the day. And just at the random time that I went in, there were a couple hundred people gathered for mass. So it does seem like a very Catholic community, a very Catholic city. So I apologize for any background noise from here on. I'm also going to have to interpret this question a little bit differently, like I did for some of the others, just because of the nature of my project. The convergence of traditional and modern worlds in Paris is very easy to see with the naked eye just through the architecture in many of the buildings there. Architecture is so well preserved, I feel. In doing a little bit of research, a lot of it dates back to 1600s and even further. Yet on the inside of these buildings, you will see completely modern businesses, modern apartments, things like that, that shows the values to Parisians, to the French, their traditional sense, as well as being a big city and being modern and keeping with the time. So in this picture, I put the common goods sold in stores, like those which we were going into, your trinkets and clothes. They're largely outsourced to a lot of the places that we'll see, like Malaysia, your Cambodia. I even saw some in South America as well, like Chile and I believe Argentina. But since France is part of the EU, you can expect them to get a lot more of their heavier trade goods from other countries within the EU, such as Germany and Italy, Spain, UK, for a lot of their machinery and aircraft, chemicals, like things like that. They're more from developed countries. It's where you can expect them to get them from, whereas we in America might get things like that largely from China. Most of our goods are going to be imported from China across the board, regardless of the good. And so that's kind of an interesting difference between us and them, I feel. So the two kinds of businesses and economic activities kind of that we saw very prevalent in Paris while me and my group were there for the couple days that we were luxury goods along the lines of Louis Vuitton, Gucci, and the tourist goods, capitalizing on the romanticism and the tourist effect that the city has. Selling paintings, like in the pictures that I put up, prints, any kind of trinket, magnet, postcard kind of thing that has Paris plastered on it, and sells like crazy on both sides. As far as the luxury goods are concerned, the real estate in Paris is some of the most valuable in the world, so you can expect some of the wealthiest people living there, and really the sky is the limit with how much money you want to spend. So it makes sense that they have a lot of these luxury businesses spread all around, easy to access. So what was interesting to me was just how accessible tourist goods were. Um, a lot of places here in the United States, you might have certain places that you have to go just catering to tourists, right near something that might be our equivalent of an Eiffel Tower or something along those lines. But there, any kind of store that you're going into, whether it be groceries or liquor, um, they're going to have tons of tourist goods, whether it be keychains, magnets, postcards, things that are easy to pick up. It's almost in a way as if the tourist culture there almost outweighs the culture of Parisians, because tourism is such a vast income for many of the people throughout the city. So my project specifically didn't amount to studying ethnic enclaves and studying the immigrants within them, within the United States. But going to Paris, I feel like I can see why that would be such a prevalent thing. There, they just have so much culture to offer, so much that differs from ours, I feel, and it's such an everlasting culture between their language, their food, a lot of their social values. Um, it becomes, or at least I feel it is this very valuable thing to them, and it would be such a shame to lose it through globalization. So I can definitely see why they would place so much value in keeping it still while they immigrate to the United States. So modern day France is a highly urbanized city. Um, it's populated with a lot of fairly and just very tall buildings that make use of very valuable real estate, stuffing people in as close of quarters as they reasonably can. They have traffic very comparable to our own in Los Angeles, Orange County. They also have very strong public transport, being that they are highly urbanized. Something else about them is their emphasis on historical preservation. Architecture, for example, the Notre Dame dates back to 1100s, with a lot of the general theme in buildings dating between the 16 to 1800s. The Louvre even is between the 12 and 1500s. One of the coolest things to me was how you could be walking around just the most random part of the city, and you would just happen across magnificent statues and cathedrals and opera houses, bridges, roads. Just what they use to make their roads even is so historically preserved, to make this image that is Paris. As for the economic activity in Paris, as far as their repertoire is concerned, I feel they're in a league of their own between their high urbanization and beauty held through historical preservation of architecture, largely. And this could just be coming from a tourist point of view, obviously, but they have great access to goods with the River Seine running right through the middle of the city. The nearest port, similar in size to our own Long Beach port, is only 200 miles away, and it's right at the gate of River Seine, so it provides a way of getting goods to people very easily. Something interesting to me was how valuable real estate there is, not just because of how condensed buildings are, because in the past there actually have been quite low building restrictions for how high you can build new buildings, just to preserve the appeal of the city. So they maintain a certain density along with value that, while staying as small as they are in a way relative to cities like New York, which aren't afraid to shoot high rises hundreds of feet up just to house people. Um, it boasts some of the most interesting economic situations that I've seen, between luxury goods, catering to the uber rich, and beggars, in my experience, who would actually follow you along for a good 5 or so paces, still with their hands wide open, asking you for money after you've said no a few times. There's huge income disparity, as far as I can see, between those people in Paris. And so it really is much different than anything I could have expected.